I've made this short video to bring you up to speed with everything you need to know about your NHS appraisal. We've seen a change in the focus of appraisal. So pre-COVID, it was felt to be quite burdensome, and after suspension in 2020 during COVID, it was relaunched with a focus on well-being. In 2022, there's been a further relaunch with a focus on professional development whilst maintaining the focus on well-being as well. So what's appraisal for? Well, it's a process of facilitated self-review supported by discussion of the full scope of a doctor's work, including verbal or written reflection on the categories of supporting information defined by the GMC. And it consists of 4 steps: looking back at achievements, challenges and lessons, looking forwards to aspirations and learning needs, providing support and discussion of health and well-being, and it's an opportunity to demonstrate that the doctor's up to date and fit to practice in accordance with GMC guidelines. When your revalidation is due, the responsible officer has 3 options. They can recommend a revalidation, they can recommend a deferment, and this is usually due to either absent missing information, absence from work, or ongoing unresolved concerns, or they can recommend administrative removal if the doctors repeatedly fail to engage in appraisal for no clear reason. It's important to think about what appraisal can offer you, and this can include discussions around your role as a GP and your priorities and where you can be best fulfilled. This slide provides a number of context setting and prompts for these discussions, and if you want more detail about how these can be used, have a listen to the longer version of this video. Wellbeing is a key part of the appraisal discussion. Aside from the declaration about your health, there are some questions that I've captured there from the template, but remember that it is a voluntary discussion and that you can choose not to discuss your well-being or your health if you prefer. As you can see here, there are inputs and outputs to the appraisal process. 3 of the 4 inputs are captured in the medical appraisal template, which is embedded in online platforms, and these are scope and nature of work, review of last year's PDP, and achievements, challenges and aspiration. Supporting information no longer needs to be provided in documentary form except for the MSF and PSQ once every revalidation cycle. Reflection on the doctor's CPD, QIA and relationships can be left to the appraisal discussion and facilitated by the appraiser, so there's no longer a requirement to provide reflection in writing. And then there are 3 outputs from the appraisal: the PDP, the summary and the appraiser's statements. There are 5 sign-off statements that the appraiser considers, which include confirming that the appraisal covers the whole scope of practice, that supporting information has been provided, there's been progress with PDP, a PDP has been agreed for next year, and there are no concerns. Let's look at what's new and what's changed. So similar to the 2020 appraisal format, we're still talking about a very much reduced preparation time, estimated at around an hour. No need for supporting information except for MSF and PSQ once every 5-year cycle, and reflection which can be through discussion rather than in writing. And there is still a template which has been updated, and it's not intended for standalone use, it's embedded in online platforms. What's new is that the template includes more detail on the scope of work. It now includes the health and probity declarations, and it includes additional questions to help doctors reflect on their CPD, quality improvement and feedback. The next key section in the template is to describe your challenges, achievements and aspirations. So what personal and professional challenges or constraints have you faced? What have been your greatest achievements? And what do you hope to achieve in the future, personally and professionally? The next section is about keeping up to date, maintaining and enhancing the quality of your professional work. And the questions are: what have you done to keep up to date across the whole scope of your work? What are the most significant things you've learned? And have you identified any learning needs that you need or want to address, or key learning to be shared? If so, what action have you taken as a result? There's currently no requirement to keep a CPD log, so no requirement to count hours or record reflections, but it may be useful to keep a CPD log if you want to demonstrate the breadth of your learning, balance between specialist and generalist roles, and also if you're planning a move from having a more narrowed scope of practice to a broader one, and to show that you're preparing yourself for any changes. Also as an aid memoir for the appraisal discussion. It's also really easy to do now with the various phone apps that are linked to appraisal toolkits. Remember that mandatory training is an employment requirement and is not required for revalidation. In the template section about reviewing your practice, which covers your CPD QIA and feedback from patients and colleagues, you'll be asked, what have you learnt from reviewing your practice across the whole scope of your work? What are the most significant things you've changed as a result, and how effective have those changes been? And what else do you want to change, if anything? There was previously a focus on documentary supporting information. In the new guide published 2022, it says doctors are encouraged to be selective. The aim is to provide sufficient information to illustrate their practice and facilitate a useful discussion that leads to insight and development, not to submit an exhaustive summary of all professional activities. There are still the same categories of supporting information required by the GMC, but they can be provided through discussion rather than documentation. It's only the last two categories on the slide, feedback from colleagues and feedback from patients, which still need to be provided in documentary form. All doctors are required to be involved in quality improvement activities, and this needs to be demonstrated at appraisal, but it can be demonstrated through discussion. It doesn't necessarily have to be demonstrated through documentation, and the range of activities that can count as quality improvements is very broad. There's some of them are listed here, so this is something that you're likely to be doing anyway as part of your day-to-day work. Regarding feedback, you'll be asked, what have you learned from any feedback, solicited or unsolicited, that you've had about your practice, both individually and as part of the teams you work in? And that may be from patients or carers or other group that you provide medical services to, including teaching, training and appraising, from your colleagues or complements that you've been personally named in. And you'll be asked, what have you changed or do you want to change, if anything, because of any feedback you've received? Increasingly, patient feedback is collected by employers automatically and continuously, and the Appraisal 22 guidance suggests that the burden of supporting information should, wherever possible, pass to the employer. So it may be acceptable to provide this feedback for appraisal and revalidation purposes instead of using the commercial tools to do a formal exercise. Do check with your responsible officer or appraisal lead in good time. Patient feedback for revalidation purposes must be collected from the current revalidation cycle. It must be collected in an unselected manner. There must be the possibility of free text comments, not just ratings. It obviously has to be collected on a voluntary basis from patients and anonymously, and the doctor must reflect on it, and it must cover the doctor's whole scope of work. The following are not requirements, however. It doesn't have to use any specific GMC questions. This has been superseded by the latest GMC guidance. It doesn't have to be a benchmark, doesn't have to use a specific commercial tool, and doesn't have to use face-to-face consults, nor do you have to seek feedback from every service that you work in. I've highlighted here the key aspects of colleague feedback from the GMC guidance. So again, it's important that it's anonymous, confidential and voluntary across the scope of your work, but that doesn't mean necessarily from all your employers if you have several, based on the values of good medical practice, and include free text comments as well as ratings. And data collection should be managed independently of the doctor by the survey provider or an organisation where the doctor works. You are required to disclose and discuss all significant events according to the GMC definition, and it's important to realise that the GMC definition of a significant event is not the same as that previously used in primary care. So from the GMC point of view, a significant event is any unintended or unexpected event which could or did lead to harm of one or more patients, and this includes incidents which did not cause harm but could have done, or where the event should have been prevented. And you're required to declare these and reflect on them, on the events in which you've been personally named or involved. When you're first allocated an appraiser, it's worth just checking that there's no conflict of interest, and then early on clarifying the expected time window of the appraisal. In some areas, appraisals are expected to occur in the birthday month. It's worth mentioning early on any career breaks which you have planned or have had over the last year, because they may affect your preparation or the timing of the appraisal, and then confirm the choice of tool or platform that you intend to use, whether it's one of the online ones or whether you're using the MAG, though do be aware that the MAG hasn't been updated for a while, and increasingly it does lead to problems with opening on more updated systems. Then you want to discuss your preferred mode, whether you want it in person or remotely, and it is your choice. However, if you choose a face-to-face appraisal, you also need to check that you can agree on a mutually convenient location, and if this isn't possible, it may be necessary to reallocate you to a different appraiser. And then finally, be sure that you're ready to submit and sign off your documents 2 weeks before you meet. We often talk about wearing various hats in medicine, and this is why I've chosen this picture. So this is about scope of practice. You're required to cover all the roles and positions, both clinical and non-clinical. So non-clinical might include educational or managerial, and also contact details of any employing organisations where you've worked. Many GPs have acquired an additional craft, a specialism, and they need to be prepared to discuss in their appraisal how they trained for the role, how they keep up to date, and how they know they're doing a good job. So, for example, they may have a formal performance review, or they may have some kind of peer review, or simply receive feedback from patients or colleagues, or opportunities to reflect on their role. Increasingly, there are questions asked about different types of GP role. So, as well as having non-clinical roles, GPs may have specialist GP roles, or even within general practice they may do NHS or private work, and within the NHS they may do practice-based roles and roles outside of practice, such as in urgent care, for example, out of hours or urgent treatment centres or 111. And then there are the digital roles, which may be both practice-based and out of practice in both NHS and private. So there's a lot of variety. So here are a few key points. You must do some NHS GP work to stay on the medical performers list, and you must do some NHS work in the region where you are appraised. There's no requirement to do practice-based work to stay on the medical performers list. For example, you can do exclusively urgent care or remote digital work. Appraisal is about fitness for your current role, not the role in which you got your CCT in. And appraisal is an opportunity to discuss how you might plan your transition to a broader scope if you are planning to go back from a more restricted scope of practice to your original broader scope of practice. And this transition might involve some supervision, mentoring, or retraining. And that's something that can be explored in the appraisal if you want. Some GPs adopt a role focused on a narrow scope of their work, for example, urgent care. And in this situation, they have to learn to manage risk because they're not using their full set of skills for which they were trained. And managing this risk involves a number of components. So there's maintaining boundaries around the caseload that they are competent at seeing. There's maintaining adequate peer support and CPD. And ultimately, it's really important to have insight into which skills you're maintaining and which ones you're not, so that if you do decide to return to a broader scope of work, you can make the necessary arrangements to keep you safe, which might involve retraining, induction, some supervision and mentoring before a return to the full breadth of your practice. If you work less than 40 sessions a year in NHS general practice, you're advised to complete the low volume structured reflective template, and this explores these 9 areas to help have an informed discussion between you and your appraiser that will then guide the development of your personal development plan. You may find that you have to take a career break for a variety of reasons, maternity, sickness, sabbatical, and there's no requirement to do CPD during career breaks, but it might make your return easier. There's also no minimum number of appraisals you have to carry out in 5 years, so you don't have to do catch-up appraisals, although they can be a useful return to work experience. It is advisable to request formally a approved missed appraisal from the RO, although it's recognised that in unplanned breaks like sickness that can be difficult. So wherever you can, do keep in touch with your RO, and do be aware that there is a return to general practice scheme for clinicians wishing to return after longer breaks. At the end of the appraisal, the appraiser is required to consider 5 sign-off statements and to indicate whether they agree or disagree with them, and you can pause the video to read them here. If the appraiser disagrees with any of these statements, then the doctor will be flagged up for closer scrutiny by the appraisal team and the responsible officer, generally so that they can be provided with additional support or a deferment can be arranged. This slide is just to show you the guidance I've referred to throughout, so the Medical Appraisal Guide 2022 by the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, which is advisory. There's this good medical practice guidance by the GMC and guidance on supporting information for appraisal and revalidation, and then there is the statutory guidance listed below. I hope you found this useful. Do please send me some feedback directly to my email address below.